Thank you, everyone, for coming to this afternoon's panel. It's Friendship in a Digital Age, Social Media as a Means to Communion. My name is Jeff Pojanowski. I'm a professor at the law school. And I'm here to introduce our panelists and moderate. We've got a great slate of panelists. I look around and think to myself, how do these people get outside of my phone? We have a great slate. We have Father Harrison Ayre, who's from the Diocese of Victoria. He's a priest in that diocese. He's the co-host of the Clerically Speaking podcast, and is currently a doctoral student with Maryvale Institute, researching the theological anthropology of Joseph Ratzinger. Father Harrison completed his MDiv and his MTH at the Newman Theological College in Edmonton. He's been ordained for 4.5 years and is currently the pastor of Holy Family Notre Dame Parish in Port Alberni, BC. Moving closer to me, we have Shannon Last of Famous Last Words. She served as a senior speechwriter for Attorney General John Ashcroft and then FBI Director Robert Mueller. After more than 15 years of attempting to achieve work-life balance, she left the FBI to become a stay-at-home mom to 4 lovely near occasions of sin, ages 11, 9, 6, and 3. When she is not refereeing fights, sweltering at baseball games, making meals nobody likes, or exiling small humans to their rooms, she also works as a freelance speechwriter, ghostwriter, and book editor for her business Famous Last Words. She's a Jersey native. She studied English literature and Italian literature at Smith College, where she made history as possibly the first student at the progressive all-women's school to run to the nearest RCIA class within a week of her arrival on campus. She has continued to fail the sisterhood ever since. She's a former cantor and member of the Schola Cantorum at St. Matthew's Cathedral in DC, but she currently lives in Exurban, Virginia, where guitar masses are a dismaying fact of life. Next, we have Sister Theresa Aletheia Noble of FSP, Daughters of St. Paul. She's a religious sister with the Daughters of St. Paul, a former atheist. She now dedicates her time to reminding us that we'll die. Spreading the gospel using modern media. She works as an editor for Pauline Books and Media and just completed her master's in philosophy and theology from Boston College. You can find her at Pursued by Truth. And last, we have Father Anthony Sciarappa of the Diocese of Pittsburgh. Father Anthony is a priest there. He attended Duquesne University and the Catholic University of America. He's currently parochial vicar of Holy Spirit Parish. He is also the co-host of Clerically Speaking. And we will start off with, I believe, Sister Theresa talking, correct? Great.
So just to be clear, my comments are kind of setting the scene for everyone, but I'm not speaking for everyone. So hopefully, actually...
You'll find out.
Yeah. Social media is much maligned. Often the very people who use social media seem to have the most antipathy toward it and toward the people who use it. However, the church, though its thought on social media, social communication, and media has developed over time, has had a surprisingly optimistic stance toward media. In 1957, Pope Pius XII referred to the media as gifts of God. And this phrase was repeated in the Vatican II document, Communio et Progressio. In this emphatic sentence, the church sees these media as gifts of God. So what does this mean for a conversation on social media and friendship at a Catholic university? It means that though there may be some obvious drawbacks to our media culture and the use of social media, there are positive aspects to this new form of communicating. And so during this panel, we're going to discuss its implications for friendship. So first of all, before speaking about social media and friendship, we have to at least have a baseline definition of friendship from which to work. Though the greatest thinkers in the church differed to some extent on this definition, I think we can safely work from Augustine's definition in his Confessions. He writes, "There's no true friendship unless you, God, welds it between souls that cleave together through that charity which is shed in our hearts by the Holy Spirit who is given to us." True friendship, then, has its object in God, and it is God who facilitates love between friends. This highest form of friendship then centers around together seeking wisdom, virtue, and God. This leads me to my first argument, which is that social media can lead us to become more virtuous. Yes, I'm actually making that argument. If we follow the right people on social media and use it in the right way, we can learn virtue from those around us and encourage one another to virtue. Social media can edify, and it can provide us with examples of virtue. This is not necessarily friendship in itself, but it may lead to real-life friendship that helps us to grow in virtue and definitely can augment our friendship with God, which is the most important friendship for us to maintain. So in that sense, social media relationships, if they don't lead to real-life friendships, can help our most important friend relationship, that of us to God. In the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle sees living together as an ideal for friendship. So with that in mind, it would seem that social media friendships would be the lowest form of friendship because it's highly mediated and can seem like an almost disembodied communication. Although a related issue that we may discuss later is that social media communication is not quite as disembodied as we might think. So this leads me to my second argument. I would argue that mediated friendship is not necessarily less ideal than in-person relationship. Throughout history, relationship in general and friendship in particular has been mediated. Many friendships have been mediated by letter writing, for instance. We also have found examples of virtue to follow through mediation, through books and storytelling, and you see that in Augustine's Confessions. He finds examples of virtue through books and storytelling. And my final argument, which is perhaps the most controversial, is this. Friendship may be more possible and preferable in person, but in-person relationship is not necessary to friendships, particularly for the baptized person who is participating in the mystery of the indwelling of the Trinity. An example of this would be the friendship that St. Therese, a young cloistered nun, had with a seminarian named Maurice, and they conducted their friendship solely through letters. This friendship, conducted solely through letters, it surely cannot be considered a less ideal friendship simply because it was mediated. When friendships have God as their object, the drawbacks of mediation can actually be overcome to some degree, and in some cases completely. Though you may not be completely convinced by these arguments, I'm hoping that they give us all a springboard from which we can work from and will help us to have a lively conversation.
Thank you. Now, Father Anthony?
Whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is gracious, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think of these things. And so, quite clearly in sacred scripture, St. Paul tells us to delete all of our social media. I've noticed an interesting phenomenon, even online, that people will post about how terrible posting is, and they'll say, there's Twitter's a dumpster fire, and there's terrible people in my mentions. People from Philadelphia are online, and all these are truly terrible things, don't get me wrong. And it leads us to the question, is it even possible to be virtuous in this environment? So social media does not change the nature of virtue. They're not cutesy online virtues that are different from the regular virtues we experience. However, it does provide new challenges to the exercise of virtue. All virtues are social, and so when the social aspect changes, so does your exercise of that virtue, how you exercise it. Because the communication is essentially bodily. In a certain sense, it might be primarily verbal, and by that I mean the speaking and understanding of words, but these words we speak need context, and that context is provided by voice, expression, the environment, cultural understanding, and beyond that, the sacramental presence of the other person. All these factors mediate the communication of the person. Because when we communicate with someone, we're not just giving information, we're communicating who we are. Now, social media removes these facets of mediation. Now, words well written can provide a lot of context that's missing when you don't have the person in front of you. But what happens when you only have 280 characters to work with? And the context is further confused by the sheer content on social media apps. When I go to a wedding reception, I have a general idea of the context already. I already am remotely prepared for the social interactions I'm gonna have. I know the rules of this setting, unless the wedding's really crazy. But even then, you're kind of ready for that too, right? But when you're on social media, on the same screen, you may see an ad for Uber Eats, a meme about the new Kanye West album, and then a prayer request for someone's son who's died in a car crash. What do you do with that? What are the rules? What are my responsibilities when all this is on your screen at one time? So when we are overwhelmed with all of that, lost in the context and the lack of context, we feel like it can't be real. It's easier to disassociate. And this happens in two ways. One, we no longer see the other person at the end of their social media account as a real person. They are a content creator who owes me something. They're not just another pawn in an ideological camp. They're a Twitter nun who tweets about death. They're not a full person, they're a brand, right? They become non-persons, and we don't owe anything to non-persons. There's also a temptation to disassociate from ourselves. Because I'm not bodily present and I don't see the person before me, all of a sudden, it's almost like it's not me who's online. And therefore, I don't suffer any consequences for what I put online. I'm not responsible for who I am or what I say, because it's just social media. But social media should be an extension of your person. Now, different social situations become extensions or expressions of who we are. You aren't going to experience a whole lot of the other person in every social interaction, because different interactions have different rules. I'm going to act differently at Mass than when I'm hanging out with everyone and drinking after the conference. And both of these will be radically different from when I'm speaking at a family in a funeral home. There are different social rules, and that's a good thing. It gives me context. It helps me to communicate who I am in an appropriate way. It's not being inauthentic. It's not wearing a mask, but it's a different expression of yourself. And if you do it well, people who know you will know that's still you in all of those ways, right? So the key to virtue and the gateway to friendship online, shockingly, is to be deeply self-reflective. Social media should be an expression, an extension of ourselves that's not divorced from our person. And that's difficult enough. But what might be even more difficult is realize often we will not be interacting with people who have much of an interior life. They don't understand the context. They don't understand the language of social media, and maybe they think they do, which makes things even more confusing. But Jesus Christ does not call us to love the socially competent. He demands that we love everyone. Friendship, however, becomes possible when we're able to encounter others online in genuine communication. They're being themselves online through this extension. We're being ourselves online through this extension. And then we can begin to meet the real person. And through that, we can have a mutual understanding of their person. And then that opens the door to friendship. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Anthony.
Okay, I'm going to start with C.S. Lewis, who says this about friendship in The Four Loves. To the ancients, friendship seemed the happiest and most fully human of all loves. The modern world, in comparison, ignores it. It is something quite marginal, not a main course in life's banquet, a diversion, something that fills up the chinks of one's time. Few value it because few experience it. And this was before social media, which you could argue is the exact definition of a diversion that fills up the chinks of one's time. But like many tools, its potential for good or harm depends on how we decide to use it. So much to my surprise, I kind of started out in the Father Anthony camp before I knew it was the Father Anthony camp, but I've become almost totally convinced by Sister Theresa's argument that social media can lead us to be more virtuous, can inspire us to evangelize, and can actually strip away all of those curated facades that we have and allow us to share ourselves as we are, sins and all, warts and all. I recently read Joseph Epstein, who's this really wonderful essayist, book from a few years ago called Friendship, an Expose, and it's kind of part memoir, part meditation on friendship. And he describes himself as someone who has a real knack for drawing other people to himself, only to then make sure to keep most of them at a safe distance. And I really related to that. I recognized myself in that. But then I realized that in my short experience on Twitter.com, I've only been on it about 2 years. It's the only social media I do because I don't know what I would do with, I don't even know how to work the other ones. But Twitter, of all things, has kind of helped me to take a peek over my own walls that I put up and take a chance. So I opened a few windows, as Father Harrison can attest. And now I have window boxes and I have flowers, and it's kind of lovely. So the risks of social media relationships are pretty obvious. You've got the risk of intimacy without commitment, bearing your soul only to be ghosted, as the kids say. And it's also easy to create a false sense of intimacy when you don't really see or know the other person. And we can forget that God didn't create us just so that we could create content for others and consume content from others. And we may tell ourselves that being on all the platforms opens our hearts to new opportunities when really we're using them just as a distraction from heartfelt engagement. And the dopamine hit that we get every time we hit refresh can kind of diminish our sense of boundaries. I have to ask myself a lot, is this something I should be sharing online instead of with my child, with my husband, with a therapist, with a priest, with a therapist? And am I doing it intentionally, thoughtfully? Or is it because something in me needs immediate feedback, and that's the kind of feedback that you can sort of self-select on these platforms. On the flip side, instead of debilitating relationships, social media can actually facilitate them. It can alleviate social anxiety and allow people to connect who otherwise couldn't bear to in person. And it creates connections. You might not be able to fly somewhere or meet for coffee, but just kind of sharing the seasons of your life and the moments in your day can be really meaningful. And I think that can be called a form of companionship as long as you're not neglecting your actual companions by constantly typing to your virtual companions. Guilty. And it can create those connections really quickly. Again, C.S. Lewis said, the typical expression of opening friendship would be something like, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one." But one tweet can tell you you're not the only one. A single post can be the impetus to strike up a conversation that moves through companionship to true friendship. The advantages of IRL in real life, for any other olds out there, are obvious.
Okay, boomer.
I've had to learn all these things, and anyway. But there's a real pleasure in seeing how a person rolls her eyes or hearing how he laughs. A well-timed Arrested Development GIF or just the right emoji isn't a substitution for physical nuance, but I don't think it means those other forms are empty. And as Sister Theresa said, that properly understood, social media conversations are just another version of epistolary relationships. We use the tools we have, whether it's letters or landlines or smartphones or social media. These are the tools that make connection possible, and in the end, that's what matters. But if I don't convince you, listen to St. Paul's letter to the Romans. "For God is my witness, with whom I serve with my spirit in the gospel of his Son, that without ceasing I mention you always in my prayers, asking that somehow, by God's will, I may now at last succeed in coming to you. For I long to see you, that I may impart to you some spiritual gift to strengthen you. That is, that we may be mutually encouraged by each other's faith. I want you to know, brethren, that I have often intended to come to you, but thus far have been prevented, in order that I may reap some harvest." So I think it's safe to say that even without being able to hang out with the Romans IRL, St. Paul reaped a pretty good harvest. Social media makes us look down at our worst impulses, at our screens, and sometimes on each other. But those risky connections can blossom into true friendship. So I'm going to close with C.S. Lewis, who should be on this panel instead of me. He says, "The friends will still be doing something together, but something more inward, less widely shared, less easily defined. Still collaborating, but in some work the world does not yet take account of. Still traveling companions, but on a different kind of journey. Hence we picture lovers face to face, but friends side by side. Their eyes look ahead. Thanks be to Twitter, in my experience, in the case of true friendship in Christ, the eyes of the friends look upward."
So I'm going to offer a brief kind of theological, I'm trying to be brief. For those who know me, briefness is not a skill I hold well, but I try to offer just a bit of a brief theological underpinning that can help us justify the importance of social media. And I want to kind of briefly begin with something that actually came to me today, which is a brief anthropological critique. Often because we are formed deeply by a kind of Cartesian worldview, which sees the body as extension. And added to this then, we also then see technology, and I think more specifically in this case, social media, as extension. Thus, one social media use is seen more as personal expression than a real sphere of human action. But a Christian anthropological perspective does not see the body as extension of the soul or mind, or however you want to put it, but rather we are embodied souls. The two need each other to be fully themselves. To put it in an even more theological context, the human person is fundamentally a sacramental creature, and freedom then is always, and action is always and necessarily embodied. It's always going to be embodied. So if this is so, then technology too must be approached in an embodied way, where social media and our interactions are not extensions which remove ethical and personal limits in our interactions. Rather, social media is a real place of culture and human action, where persons are interacting, where the impact of freedom is incarnated in our every word, image, and every gift sent. Seen this way, social media becomes a pivotal place for the gospel to help transform it from a sphere of extension to a sphere of sacramentality. And so to help justify this, I'm going to lean on my homeboy, Pope Benedict, who I can't help but always cite. In his last address for World Communications Day, he talks specifically about social media, and I think he does a good way of summing it up, so I want to kind of sum him up for you. He says that he speaks positively, like Sister Theresa said. It's amazing how much the Pope speaks positively about the media, and that they're not some alternate or virtual reality, but as a real expression of human culture and community. This is a space where Christian witness must confidently and vibrantly express itself, because it is a space where real human encounter can and does occur. And so he kind of gives us three words, if you will, to kind of summarize this. And his three words are authenticity, dialogue, and trust. So human encounter must always have a simple confidence in its authentic witness to Christ. Authenticity for the Christian means being truly oneself, to not becoming an avatar of any particular ideology, ecclesiological or otherwise, nor does it mean to give a rose-colored picture of faith where everything is always and everywhere perfect. Authenticity means a true picture of a faith lived out. Thus, if social media is a real place of human interaction, it follows that we are to be truly human there, sharing the joys and the struggles of life, imbued with the confidence of faith and hope that Christ is present through thick and thin. I always think about Romans 8, where Paul goes on that great litany of things that cannot separate us. And you can throw in that, trolls online cannot separate us from the love of Christ, right? It always means, I would argue, that even our sinfulness can get the best of us online. But it will mean that we may undiscerningly get snappy, arrogant, rude, or lack patience.
Why are you subtweeting me?
Authentic Christian witness means recognizing the sin, publicly acknowledging it, and asking the community and God for mercy. The second key element for Benedict highlights in his analysis of social media is the principle of dialogue. And now that's a famous, like, squishy buzzword that people like to use. But for Benedict, it means a very specific thing. It means it is the encounter of two reasons, a true dialogos. For Benedict, the logos is not just an abstract metaphysical principle, but it's a concrete person, right? It's the logos made flesh in Jesus Christ. In truth, we could actually argue that for Benedict, it's really not a dialogue, it's more of a trialogue. Two reasons meet each other in the reason, Jesus Christ. Two creatures and their creator. Thus, this dialogue has to always first be rooted in its encounter with Christ, where the reason of God, the logos of God, purifies our reason to bring us into a deeper encounter with God, into an openness towards the other. That, for Benedict, is what dialogue is. This is all possible for him in the spirit of Christian trust. Social media, if a space of human encounter and culture, means it is a space for both human and divine freedom to interact. Wherever human freedom is, divine freedom is at play. there's that drama of those two freedoms always at work. As he notes, ultimately, any good fruit born through social media is the work of the Holy Spirit. This human desire for God, to love and to be loved, needs a space that is only opened by the power of God and the lived witness to the grace of God. This echoes Pope Benedict's words to the representatives of culture in France in 2008, one of my favorite lectures he ever gave, where he talks about how authentic culture and renewal is not brought about by systematic effort, technocratic planning, or some weird attachment to saving a decrepit civilization. But it's in the simple act of the quaerere Deum, the seeking of God. The Christian witness in social media is another place where the word can be both spoken and revealed only when the Christian is authentically and truly seeking after God, and thereby inflaming the desire for God and others. This witness is, in conclusion, a real means for establishing communion. For Benedict, social media can never be truly an end in itself. When the Christian interacts with others online, when real communion is built, it always desires the truly concrete experience of Christian friendship and fellowship, of being in that bodily presence of others. It brings about real life friendship. It might mean people want to meet who they've met online, or to be more strongly connected to their local communities and to the local church. Social media, when effective, leads to authentic Christian thriving in the concrete localities of Christian practice. Communion amongst the baptized is necessary for communion with Christ. When social media is working toward this goal, it fulfills the demand of bringing the gospel to all in an authentic, dialogical, and trusting manner.
Well, thank you for that. So I think the panelists are gonna kind of chat amongst themselves for your benefit for a little bit. And then we'll open up for some questions. And I guess I'm going to pull out one question for you all to bat around. And we seem to have competing views or people choosing to highlight different aspects of the same phenomenon. But I would be curious to hear a little bit more about what you all think about how social media and real life friendships are different because they're mediated. In what ways is the nature of the beast of friendship similar on social media? In which ways it's different? What are the risks and possibilities with respect to those? And this is just not me. This is not me trying to get a throwdown between Sister Theresa, Aletheia, and Father Anthony. Although I'm not saying I don't want that. So I'd be curious to see what you all thought about that.
I'm not sure if Sister and I are actually saying different things, because when you talk about experiencing the virtue of someone else online, it's because they aren't treating their online presence as a different person, right? So it's when someone is using social media well, when they have a deeper interior life, when they're reflective and purposeful about it, yeah, you really can see. And I've experienced that, when I've talked with my other priest friends who I've met exclusively through Twitter. Like, they help me become better priests, right? And even and sometimes social media and that communication and that forum, it's difficult because there's many different ways to use social media. Are you someone who's just checking up on the news? Are you a content creator? Are you speaking to your friends? Are you doing a lot of these at different times, right? So depending on how you use it, I'm using it as just a good distraction for a couple hours because I'm in between meetings and I've already said my prayers and done all the good priest stuff already, so I can use social media. Stop asking me why I'm using social media so often, right? So even as we do that, we're checking up on each other and trying to keep ourselves, virtuous, and that's helpful as well. So I'm not sure if I think we're just looking at two aspects, and I think I'm also looking more of the kind of natural aspect where you touched a little bit more on grace, which I think radically transforms social media. Yeah. So I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think you're coming from the perspective of relationship with an impoverished human anthropology, where you're going online and you're kind of thinking of yourself as this disembodied bot communicating with other people. And I think actually the fact that bots had such a influence on our election and people were actually interacting with them and following them says a lot about how we act online, that we can not realize that that's another person, not another person. So if I'm acting online in this kind of disembodied way, then yeah, it's very easy to be not virtuous. And I think that's what you were pointing out. I think where we as Catholics we're called to bring, everyone's bringing their embodiedness to social media anyways. We do everything with a body, and that's just a fact. But I think as Catholics, what we can realize is that, that there's this spiritual reality as well online, that Benedict XVI calls it a digital continent. We don't cease to be the church online. We are still the body of Christ online. So we're really called to act that way, and we have the grace to do that through the Holy Spirit that God pours into our hearts. And Thomas Aquinas says charity is friendship. So when we're showing each other charity, when we're treating one another as the body of Christ, then that's really helping other people to realize a true human anthropology and the power of grace, really, because that's really the only thing that keeps me from responding to trolls sometimes is the power of grace. So,
yeah. And I do think social media has its own temptations. Because I don't know who said it, but it's easier to fear man than it is to fear God. Because sometimes you can abstract God. But if I'm going to look at someone and insult them to their face, I have to really hate them, right? Or it's a more difficult thing to do. And there's definitely much more of a temptation because there is this kind of extension. It's embodied. We've talked a lot about being embodied and disembodied in social media. Maybe you want to say more about that, Father Harrison. But there is a certain sense where I have to be really purposeful when I'm online in a way that comes more unnaturally to me than when I'm interacting with other people who I can see face to face and encounter their person. So,
yeah, this is a thought that I'm still kind of working through that I was coming on to today about this idea of embodiedness and extension. And I think part of it is technology itself kind of comes from a very Cartesian worldview itself. So it definitely plays into that hand of extension. But I think, that's the thing, I really think that it has, this idea of embodied human action is really how we ought to be approaching social media. How that looks yet, I haven't figured out. Mm-hmm. I'm still kind of thinking this through, but I think when you take that as a starting principle, because that's really how, essentially it's about realizing, though you might not see a face is behind the screen, and seeing this is a person. When we see ourselves as extension, we see the body as a limit to freedom. But when you see ourselves as embodied sacramental creatures, we see ourselves then as gifted, right? We see ourselves as someone who's been gifted into being. And when you understand that, you realize you are not the authority of your own life. And when you understand that, that changes the whole, and that if you're gifted, that means you're going to bear the imprint and the image of the Creator. Or you're going to, at least basic philosophy, in at least a basic philosophical sense, at least there'll be some print of that you come from a Creator. If that's the case, then that's the basis of dignity between everyone we interact with. And if that person has a dignity, even if they're kind of not recognizing in me, in the case of when trolls come at you or whatever, this is a person who is worthy of love, who is worthy of Christian charity. And that is, Christian charity, I think, is the fullest expression of human action. And so when we can start even through our words, which are coming from an action, action is everything, right? So if our words have to try to bear the imprint of that Christian worldview, we start to remove the extension element and start to put in the embodied element and that sacramental element and start to transform it for something better than it is.
But it's funny because you use trolls because it's a helpful colloquial term, but even that is disinterpreting the actual other person. But it's also difficult because we use that word because all we've experienced of that other person is simply their sin too, mm-hmm. and that makes it difficult. Mm-hmm. So it's really complicated, I think. Mm-hmm.
All right. What other?
Oh yeah.
The people in charge told me to speak into the mic. So one other thing to bandy about. So we talked about some of the risks of social media, the temptation to kind of view someone as an avatar for your own rage or mockery or something like that, or just kind of draw you out from other more concrete friendships in your life. But there's also opportunities there. And one thing I would like to talk a little bit about is friendships. First off, among the priests and religious who are scattered throughout the country or the world, and how the laity experience priests and religious online, and what kind of opportunities there are for that. Presumably, they're good.
So can I take the lead?
Go.
Yeah. So I can say that it's been a real huge benefit for me. I'm in a smaller diocese, I'm the second youngest priest in my diocese, and I'm 36. And then most of our priests, we have 13 incarnated priests. We have 9 empty parishes, and most of our priests are 55 and older. And the nearest priest to me is an hour away. So you can feel isolated in that, can't you? You have no priestly fraternity, or at least it's very minimal. You have to really make an effort to build up friendship with brother priests. So for me, the priest DM has been a huge blessing and benefit, that we built up a communion and with each other, that we said we have to hang out together in real life. And that's what we did first time in Pittsburgh and so on. And now we want to do this all the time, because we encourage each other, we challenge each other. For me, it becomes the place where I'm an external processor, so I need to talk things out always. And so having a group of friends who I've learned to trust, I can say, this is what's going on in my life right now. I need some help with this. Can you help me with that? And we really do. We really trust each other. And it's been just a massive blessing. It's not perfect all the time, but it's better than nothing. I think I would feel a lot more isolated if I didn't have that. I think I am an urban boy by nature, so being in a small town in kind of the middle of nowhere, Vancouver Island, you can get isolated that way. But I haven't, and I think I really do attest to the friendship that has come through the priests I've gotten to know on Twitter, which is a weird but beautiful thing to say.
Yeah, and I think also, so at least in my formation, it was constantly brought up that you are a public person. Because when you wear this collar, you're a public person. You're always representing more than yourself. And the temptation is that, can I be myself and let Christ shine through that, or I have to be someone else? And it's important to be both, right? And I think the one thing that's helpful in social media is because I'm a public person, this is a public place. And it gives people an opportunity to look at a bit of my life, a bit of Sister's life, a bit of Father Harrison's life, right? Mm-hmm. And for so many people, they don't know who priests are. Mm-hmm. If your only experience of a priest is his celebration of Mass, you don't know who that man is. You know a very, very important part of him, hopefully, as long as he's being real in that, right? But you do not know him. And so I think the importance of being yourself online, and it sounds kind of trite, but it's very important, is a helpful witness to people around you, because it's a sharing and expression of my life that allows people to think more deeply about the priesthood when they wouldn't before. And I think sisters are even more of a mystery to people than priests, because at least people can have a false idea of priests. Oh, well, at least you're respected. Oh, well, at least for diocesan priests, you get some money. Oh, at least you can move up in your job, right? All things are terribly wrong ways to look at the priesthood, but they can at least grasp onto something they think they understand. When you see a religious, someone who's given their entire life to Christ and gets none of the perks, seemingly, it's a mystery to them. So I think your presence is helpful too. And I don't know what, Shannon, your experience of priest was before and after online, if you want to talk about that in religious.
Sure. Do you want to talk about the mystery of... I don't want to jump in front of that.
Behind the
veil. So it's interesting you ask, because I've been a Catholic for a little over 20 years, but I would say that my experience of priests was extremely limited, and mostly by design. I really didn't. I mean, no offense to the wonderful pastors, but I didn't get it, and I was afraid to open up too much, and I was afraid I just don't want to be in a position, basically, and I have always sort of felt that way. So it was actually Father Harrison who, whether I'm in a position or not, it doesn't really matter at this point. But he tweeted something a year and a half ago or something. It was about children at Mass. And that is the most lovely little, see, such a grace note. And I think that it was on a Sunday, and I might perhaps have just come from one with my children that maybe didn't go awesomely well. And I so appreciated the way that he said it that I responded, and we kind of went back and forth. And I have a Arrested Development person as my avatar. And so we immediately, we got it, because we speak that language. And I sent him a message, and it was like this, it was a real, for me, heart in my throat moment, to say, hey, I just wanted to ask him about something, but not in public. And he wrote back, and we started to chat. But it was exactly what Father Anthony said, is watching their interactions more than anything else, the way they they don't take each other too seriously, but they really are trying to edify by just being who they are and living out their priesthood online. And so it gave me this real sense of hope for the priesthood and an accessibility that I'd never felt before. I didn't want to take too much advantage of it, and now here I am sitting with a whole bunch of people and clerics. But it was really beautiful, and it just kind of allowed me to slowly open up and really try to imitate that. I'm just a mom on Twitter, but can I do that? Can I sort of get to know people a little bit at a time by saying, this is what my world looks like today. This incredible grace happened, and 10 minutes from now, I'm going to have someone's bodily fluids all over me. And that's just but that's the ebb and flow of life. And it's not.
And people say celibacy's bad.
Father Harrison has visited my family, so he knows it's it is wall to wall. But I don't mean the bodily. No. There's a reason that I write for other people for a living. But it gave me a really beautiful understanding of priests as human beings, first, I think. As for the sister mystery, I don't know. I think...
I think I'm still kind of struggling with how to be online as a religious sister. Our charism is to spread the gospel using modern media, so this is part of our charism to be online. So I feel like I'm doing ministry, but I'm also a part of a community, and I do feel the community and the support from other people around me. So I'm kind of still navigating that and understanding what that means, and also what it can mean to kind of create a celebrity culture around different things on social media. If you have a bunch of followers, it starts to be confusing also, because it's how do I deal with this as a religious, because I'm not called to proclaim myself, I'm called to proclaim Jesus Christ. But people can get confused about that, and they can kind of create this celebrity culture around different people who have a lot of followers. And so I think in the midst of all of that messiness, I try to go online asking the Lord what he wants me to do that day, and to allow the Holy Spirit to guide me. But in the midst of that, I'm messy too. And there are things that I do online or things that I say online that afterwards I bring that to prayer, and I just ask God what he thinks about it. And I think that's the main thing, is you're finding community online, but to also find that community in real life. Because my sisters also help me with that. They're like, I don't know about that tweet or what, Yeah, they keep me grounded, so I'm always bouncing things off of real people. And I'm also asking myself, am I using this online community as a surrogate, instead of actually going to real life people? Because real life community can be messier than online community. You can keep a safe distance online, but then in real life, people can challenge you a whole lot more. So that's something that I ask myself a lot too.
Can I just add to, for me, one of the neat experiences was, I'd say the first person I really became good friends with on Twitter was Sister Helena Burns, who's also a daughter of St. Paul. And we became friends because she has some spunk. We would chirp at each other about hockey. She was a Bruins fan. I'm a Canucks fan, as is right and just. And but it was great, and I never knew about the possibility of ever being friends with a religious sister. And it's awesome. And I think for me, it was like that first time because the first time we met was when I was in seminary, and then just after that. And you start to see like, there's also this, it's a beautiful, like while we don't get a chance to see each other a lot per se, you can talk or whatever, there's this beautiful complementarity that you start to experience. Like I have very few religious sisters in my diocese, and the ones that are there are, the order is going to be gone in a couple years. So there's no real chance of that complementarity that I think is always important for priests and religious. You need that male-female complementarity in a healthy, beautiful way that way. And for me, that was always a great first experience of that, and that friendship that you could have, that we can give something to each other to help us get on our way to living our vocation more fully and to seeking out Christ more passionately.
All right. So should we open the floor for questions? Okay, so let's do the mic thing. I'm not going to walk around with it, but you can maybe pass it so it can be recorded. So rather than us repeating everything, so here you go. Just kind of work it around.
There we go. Brett Robinson, McGrath Institute for Church Life. Sorry, this sounds a little abstract, but I'm thinking about things like memory and place and identity as they relate to friendship. And I'm wondering, maybe Father Anthony can start, because I'm from Pittsburgh, and I moved away in 1989, which is sort of the advent of the digital personal computer mode. So when I go back to Pittsburgh, I often feel like Guardini going back to Lake Como and seeing the great big factory and smokestack and this land of my childhood that was so kind of innocent and pure, now sort of technological. So I see Google and I see self-driving cars, and it's changed my relationship to that place. But I think about friendships that I had as a child and how important place and memory are in the formation of that. And now that I've become an aficionado, more of a lurker on Catholic Twitter, I have like dreams of Catholic Twitter people talking. And so I have these weird, like subconscious memories, subliminal memories of these exchanges, but they're not the same as memories in place that are also doing the work of identity, because it seems like as online avatars or personalities that you're doing identity construction work. So, Sherry Turkle in Second Nature, Second Self, she writes about these multiplayer online games where people are experimenting with, this is back in the 80s, but I'm going to be a woman online, or I'm going to be a wizard online. And you see some of that kind of role-playing now, maybe not so much in the fantasy mode, but this notion of like, I'm constructing an identity in real time. It's becoming part of the cultural memory because it's all being recorded, and I'm doing it in a place that is no place. Like those three things, memory, identity, place, how does that sort of figure into your imagination of friendship?
Well, first of all, congratulations. I don't know if you saw the program, but we've been upgraded to an archdiocese by the University of Notre Dame. So thank you. Thank you, University of Notre Dame. Take that, Philadelphia. So I just want to share that with you. I think a Christian should not be trying to construct an identity. A Christian should be trying to receive an identity from Christ, right? That's what you have to do. And so, there's that temptation to construct this identity online. And some of that, there can be an okay playfulness to that. Like, I know people, sometimes I play with the fact that I am a priest. And people don't think that priests should have plans to blow up the moon. But I know I can make people laugh if I do something like that, or make them hate me or whatever. So there's a kind of self-reflection on your own identity and playing off that I think is okay in little bits. But really, you should be trying to express yourself genuinely and authentically online. So I think that's the goal. But I think with the other comments about memory and place, I think because the mind, the body, we're trying to fill in those blanks of context that we don't have from online. So I don't think any of us are saying that online friendships are bad, because we wouldn't be friends, we wouldn't be here without them. But we do think, I think, that they are incomplete, right? They're bridges half built. They're something good, but not like good itself. So I think you see in those sort of things when you have, I don't know, dreams about Twitter people, or when I start using memes in real life with people who don't know online stuff and look at me weird. Thank God I don't think I've done it in a homily yet, but I have to watch out for that, right? When you're preaching to a bunch of 70-year-olds. But anyway, I think we're desperately searching for personhood and embodiedness, and you see that there is a lack of that online. Now, an imperfect means of communication doesn't mean it's a bad means of communication, but we have to understand its imperfections and the way that we're going to interact and use this sort of thing. So I don't think it's a bad thing, but I do think it's incomplete. You're going to miss some of that stuff.
For me, I think I struggle with that also, and I also struggle with numbers of people, like the onlineness of knowing or having people talk to you and not necessarily knowing who they are, being able to sort one person from the next. And then there are different sort of levels of those, that there's people that you chatter with, or, about sports or something. And then there are people that you have different types of conversation with. And then there are people you DM with, or people, so for me, when I'm trying to deepen that in a way that I can't see them in real life, or it's prayer. Honestly, it seems very silly, but I'll ask for people to pray for me, or I'll say, what can I'm going to adoration. What do you got? And people will just kind of send me something. And so I can take a name and an intention, even if I don't know the person, if I don't know their face, and I can kind of create a context in the chapel, if that makes any sense, for this person and their need. And I mean, there's someone here today that I did this when I went on pilgrimage to Rome. And I was going to different sites and had said, if you need anything, I'm going to pray at all these sites. And I was sitting at the tomb of St. Monica, who's she's St. Monica, she's amazing. And somebody who I didn't know, wasn't friends with, asked me about like the painting behind her tomb. And we started chatting. And the next thing you know, we pray the novena together. And we're both kind of deepening our experience of St. Monica and St. Augustine together online. And I just met him for the first time today. But it kind of it was mediated through twitter.com, but it became a something that I took to prayer. So, and that, at least for me, makes it more manageable, because otherwise the sea of humanity is terrifying to me. And also I feel like helpless. Like I can't even fix dinner. I can't fix, there's a world of hurt out there, and I want to fix it all, but that's kind of how I do it on a small scale anyway.
Yeah, I think you're pointing to. I'm sorry. I'll be brief.
You're good. Yes, sit down. How dare you? Sister is talking. I am so sorry, sister. Please.
It's so mean.
I think you're pointing to a real lack in social media. It is lacking these things, but I also think that Shannon is right, that it does have a place for the Christian especially, and not to totally spiritualize it, but it is true that we have a meeting place in God, and that our charity is what binds us together. And so when you're dreaming about the people that you know on Twitter, I feel like that's going to find its culmination, whether you meet them in person or not. It's going to find a culmination in heaven, in the resurrection of the body. So there will be something to kind of quench that desire for communion with people.
I think like your question around these things I think are important. I think they're questions we still kind of really have to ask and investigate. Because I think there's something to this idea of if we can act embodied on social media. I think these questions about place, memory, and identity start to make a bit more sense. Like I think there's a reason Pope Benedict calls it a digital continent, right? A continent's a place, right? It is something new and it's something different. It's something we have to really kind of come to grips with, essentially, not just as Christians, but as human beings, because we don't want to be Luddites that say we want to destroy all of this and get like kind of like a Battlestar Galactica, let's just destroy all technology at the end of the show type of idea. I think that's not a human way of dealing with reality. It's tough because like modernity really likes this idea of displacement, right? Like it really, and so I think in a way like social media has almost become a way, because I think you're onto something about this idea, especially like of place, We need a place to stand. We need a place to find who we are, etc. And so because we are so displaced now, right? It's like how many people here live in the same place they grew up? Okay, a few. Okay, good. But you're in the minority, right? In my town, you'd be the majority, by the way. But yeah. But like
45 years.
Yeah. But like this is the thing, right? We don't live off, like we're so displaced that we have no community anymore because we don't have, and the natural places that would form community locally aren't those natural places anymore. Like it's very confusing in this way. These things that just kind of naturally grew up in culture, they've all been removed. And so I think almost social media has become this way to kind of fill in that gap, but we're still figuring out how it's supposed to fill the gap well. And I think it's a question, I think like your question around those three things is so important. And I think it's a question we kind of still need to ask and discuss and investigate.
You're permitted to speak.
Thank you for being such a good sport. Yeah.
I'm Mary Farrow. I'm with Catholic News Agency, so I follow a lot of you guys online. I have kind of a related question. I think it was you, Shannon, who was talking about vulnerability and like boundaries. And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot because I feel like every time I see someone post something that's like very vulnerable, almost to the point of where I'm like, wow, like, should that be shared online? Everyone's like, thank you so much for your vulnerability. Like, this helped me so much. I relate, blah, blah, blah. So, like, what's the balance of vulnerability and authenticity, but then also, like, appropriate boundaries and knowing, like, this should not be shared online with thousands of people?
Yeah, that's a tough one.
You're an expert
On vulnerability.
on boundaries online. I'm kidding.
Solid burn. I deserved it. I don't.
I think I'm gonna jump in.
No,
okay.
I would like you to.
Okay,
jump
yeah,
in.
and then just cut me off as soon as you want to.
Okay,
It'd be,
I'm gonna get my thoughts
because I
together.
deserve it. But I think Christians are meant to show each other our wounds.
Yeah.
We're supposed to show each other our wounds. And a lot of times we're really bad at that. Now, I think there needs to be a line. You want to show people your wounds, but you don't want to bleed all over them and put like. But at the same time, there are certain things that I've seen discussed online which are truly deeply painful that because they've been discussed have really helped other people, right? So is the too much because of a social stigma that is not Catholic? In that case, we need to change that, right? But also, suffering is also sacred, and not everyone is welcomed into the sacred places at the same time, too, right? So, for example, I think it's important for a priest to share struggles, but a priest shouldn't get up for the homily and share everything he confessed last week, right? Because that would be abuse. It would be, because you're thrusting on something. It becomes less about a sharing of a pain in hopes of healing and more of a self-indulgent thing. And the difficult thing with social media is that there's such a temptation for the self-indulgence, right? Because this will be good content. I'll get the likes. I'll get the dopamine hit. So I think there's a few questions there. Is this a stigma that we need to break to help for healing? Am I doing this solely for myself? I'm also doing it for other people. I think when you're in the midst of hurt, I think you let the people who are closest to you into those places first. For your safety, for safety of everyone else around you, because it is sacred and you should take off your shoes when you're there. It's very important. So there's always going to be, for me, I think, a vague answer to that. And there's some of like trusting with your gut if you're trying to be a well-formed person, and also trusting the Holy Spirit as well.
I think you pretty much nailed it, that it's a discernment, really, because, and a wellness, like and I mean that in like a real mental wellness. When you're going through something, you don't always have the wherewithal to recognize those boundaries, which is why it's nice to have a smaller community to help, because you want to avoid. I think you could mostly tell when something is being more performative, not always, and I think we all try to avoid that because you can tell what it looks like and it's not particularly attractive. But it's also important to recognize when it's a real cry of the heart. I don't really cry of the heart really on Twitter because which isn't to say like I'm flippant. I mean, I am flippant like a lot, but I mean, I will share things, but they're not things that like if it's something I couldn't or wouldn't want to share with my immediate circle of trusted family and friends, I'm not going to share it on Twitter. But there might be something that I react to or respond to in a really limited way so that it's clear that I know or I have had some experience of this enough to share just a sliver to almost just to create that credibility is not the right word, but like to tell the other person, like I know where you're coming from, at least on some level, and make it safe for them to talk. But sometimes I just take that stuff offline. It's actually technically online, just, in a different space online. Because you do, like, I really feel it's like the mother hen in me. I want to protect that, that impulse to grieve out loud or to process out loud something that maybe later you're like, but that also might be the only place some people have. And so it's important to honor that and to sort of discern that as well. It's not a very good answer, but it's what I got.
I think too with all that, there's always like a general rule is always the greater the intimacy of friendship, the greater the ability to share. So if you're just going to go out to everyone online and share things that should be reserved really just to your closest friends, like that's a bad idea. I think also, I had a point, now it's just all leaving me. Like when Father Anthony's talking about like the showing of the wounds, right? This is how the disciples recognized Jesus in the resurrection accounts in John's gospel, right? He says he shows them the wound and says then they recognized it was the Lord. But like he said, he's not bleeding out all over them, but he still has his wounds in his resurrected body, right? So there is a healing that's happened that gives you that objectivity to reveal something new. Otherwise, if we're just kind of allowing those wounds to fester online, it's not good for the person, it's not good for everyone else, because it can actually do damage. Wait, I'm going through that too. Am I going to be like that? Right? That could be a bad thing. So it's about that healthy, it does, like the word we're using, everyone is this idea of discernment. And the other thing is too, it's also, I think there is who are you, right? As a priest, I think there are some things about my own life I should not be sharing online at all because of this nature, like how people, like there's a general understanding of how people will perceive a priest or a religious. And I think there are discussions that are good and important for us to have, but in much more private contexts amongst brothers or amongst sisters, because those are things that we can kind of talk about together that people won't understand, right? When people are fighting you over a funeral ministry thing in your parish, that's not something to go online about or whatever, because that's not going to do people any good. It's just a sympathy cry, right? But I can talk about that with my brother priests who know that situation all too well and who can help give a sounding board to the problem.
This is Father Jordi from the School of Church Communications in Rome. So thank you very much for your presentations. Bishop Barron, that I think that we all know and follow. Bishop Anthony Sciarappa, no. I remember him saying that 90% of the comments that he received in his channel are hateful. My question for you is, have you been publicly shamed? How do you deal with, and which is the average of hateful comments to your digital interactions, and how do you deal with it?
Well, we all know how he deals with it.
Blockchains. We're going to hear about blockchains soon.
She wants to start.
I'm ready to give a justification for
I'm sure you are. I had an experience a few weeks ago where I got trolled for essentially saying just because something's from another culture doesn't mean it's pagan. That's all I said. No context, or it's just a comment. And then I got trolled very quickly and very harshly, and to the point, I've been learning that I don't need to engage with every hateful comment that's thrown my way. But it's very rare. I would say it's actually quite rare. Partially, I think as you maybe grow in an online presence, you have a larger community to come to your defense in a way. People will come and help you out and say, this isn't right, this isn't fair, you shouldn't be saying to this person, or you're misjudging his intentions, etc. But that day was really tough, and so when it gets tough like that, and I think it's only happened to me twice, I locked down the account, so only my followers can see me for a bit. I shut down the computer and the phone, I deleted my old tweets. I went back the next day and unlocked, and everything was fine. And I prayed, and remember, as we say in our podcast, Jesus said to pray for your enemies. So you pray for them. You pray for them, because who knows why they're doing this, where it's coming from. But they too are and when you pray for your enemies, it reminds you this is a person who is created in the image and likeness of God, who has their image imprinted on their being. That is worthy. That is someone worthy to be prayed for, regardless of what they've done to me. And I think that's really, really important.
Social media is not my ministry. It's not. For Bishop Barron, he's made that his ministry, and he does it very, very well. I'm a big fan. So there's a difference in your approach to that. And the way I see it is that social media is my ministry in the sense that going to the grocery store is my ministry, right? While I'm there, I'm a priest, and people may talk to me, people may yell at me, and I'll take that as I go. But if everyone in the grocery store is coming up to yell at me, I'm not going to that grocery store in the morning anymore, because I'm there to get eggs, right? So hopefully this makes sense. I'm there on Twitter as a way to interact with people I've met and have grown to know and to love, and to see what's going on, and to make some jokes. And in that, I will be doing ministry of witness, right? And having spiritual thoughts is part of who I am. I'm a priest. It's great. I love it. So I might share those things, and that's ministry. But it's not my primary ministry. My primary ministry is the 7 parishes that have recently become one in Lawrence County, PA. Those are the people in a particular way I'm dedicated to. Yes, I'm a priest for everyone, but also I'm assigned there. So for me, it has to be, how do I choose to do this? And where are the safety and the boundaries that I put up? Because, yeah, you're supposed to be all things to all people, but you can't be it all at the same time, right? So I think just to keep from burnout, you don't owe everybody everything online. How are you choosing to use it? Is this the ministry you're called to, or is it not? And go from there.
I think different things have different levels of hate, and I think he was talking about YouTube, which is really pretty bad. So for me, it depends. I think what's hard for me is not the hate, but there's like people will send me sexual like pictures and things like that, and that's really horrific. So because this is my charism, I know that like we'll be attacked online if we're trying to spread the gospel. So I pray St. Michael prayers before I go online, and I block freely. Like if I get a creepy vibe from someone, whether or not they've said something really creepy, I take that as a discernment of the Holy Spirit, and I block them. So I think I've learned proper boundaries and not to feel bad about that, because I think it's important to protect ourselves online from some of the nastiness that can be there.
I think I've taken a similar approach. I haven't been on social media all that long relatively, and I haven't been too overzealous because I'm a pleaser, and so mostly I just like, I want to stop just short of that line. I have crossed that line, though, and it's easy to behave badly and to say things that you wouldn't say. So I block also for stuff, people who are being jerky, because I just don't, like, my husband's not even on Twitter, and he's like, why would you want that in front of your eyeballs when you could not have it in front of your eyeballs? And then I roll my eyeballs. And his point is well taken, but I've managed to curate pretty well so that I don't see stuff that I know is going to bug me, or if it's like outright hostile, or if I know that I'm going to react to it and it's a near occasion of sin for me because I know that I'm going to say something, then I try to proactively. I don't always succeed at it. But again, I'm not obviously a cleric or religious, so I don't think I get that sort of hatred. I'm just a Catholic, so I get like the normal Catholic hatred, and also I get a lot of stuff from people who think that I am the same person as my spouse, and that we have all the same ideas. We say all the same things. Everything he writes and publishes was secretly written and published by me, and I'm just
You
You
are
are
a
a
ghostwriter.
yeah, not for him. Could you imagine ghostwriting him? Like, that's an impossibility. But anyway, so sometimes I get like a lot of that. Like, I'm like, I think you actually mean to be attacking the man I love, and so I'm gonna block you too, because I don't need to hear that. But it's a different level, I think, of intensity than what priests and religious experience.
Get time for one more question in the back. Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Yeah. So I'm one of those nasty Luddites Father talked about who wants to blow up the whole thing. But in the last 3 or 4 years during which I've used Twitter, I've actually been pleasantly surprised would be an understatement. You know, I've made friends, people who will be lifelong friends through this medium. But I do have another concern, one which I don't think can be separated from the things that are sort of intrinsically good about social media for Catholics. And this is people who, in their day-to-day lives, do not have a lot of contact, perhaps even none, outside of maybe going to Mass on Sunday, with good, normal, decent Orthodox Catholics. Maybe they don't even have this at home. Maybe these are people who are converts or reverts who got married and then got serious about the faith later. And during the day, they live this life where they go online and they tweet, you know, repent and submit to the Pope memes or whatever. Spicy Lefebvre gifts. You know, you can dial up the notch however much you need to. But then they go home, or they're at work, or whatever, and they have changed in ways that the people around them haven't. And my question, I think especially maybe for people in mixed marriages, or people who, even if they're not formally in mixed marriages, are in situations where they're at in their spiritual lives, you know, it's not the same as where their spouses are. What are the dangers there? Is this something that any of you have thought about or considered?
I think, yeah, there's definitely danger. So I think there's a crisis of authority in the church right now, a crisis of earned authority, because of what's been in the news. I mean, you know, my diocese was in the PA Grand Jury report. That, and then there can sometimes be a frustration for people who, in their parishes, maybe weren't taught the faith in a way that they were able to appreciate it. And all of a sudden they discover it outside of the parish, right? And then there can be a feeling of resentment. Shouldn't my priest have taught me this? Shouldn't my bishop have taught me this? And I totally understand that. But where you go from that is very important, because there's people willing to prey off your anger and profit off your anger, and they are online, right? So there can be many pitfalls there. And you'll have someone finally saying something that you were like, yes, someone's finally saying the truth. They're not giving me some political speak. They're not listening to their lawyers before they speak. And that's very attractive, right? But that's not how authority in the church works either. So I think one of the dangers is who are you going to? How are you discerning what someone's teaching? Because someone can be teaching a lot of good stuff too, and then have like a really crazy angle on something about the Pope, because everyone's got crazy ideas about the Pope. Because I mean, that's a good thing for. No, anyway, I don't know where I was going with that. Stop that. Stop the recording. No. Okay. But Brandon, submit, right? So if you don't have, and a lot of times it's the difficult thing for some converts, reverts, whatever, is what is the church really? I think it's another crisis. So I think there's a crisis in authority, which is very much tied to a lack of understanding of what and who the church is and who she belongs to. And so I think there needs to be a further catechesis in that. So if you don't know what you're doing online, try not to make anyone online your hero, is my one bit of concrete advice. Because we're all just people with opinions, and we got, you know, plenty of them. So I think I'll leave my answer at that.
All right, well, thank you, everyone. Unfortunately, our time is up. So we'll thank the panelists, and thank you for all coming out today.